There's a lot that we don't know about what exactly happened within Khaenri'ah during the Cataclysm, but from an unexpected source, a fairy tale of all things, we get a glimpse into the last moments of the Vinster King, and the unexpected hero who saved Teyvat from a fate even worse than history remembers. With Durin's release, we also got a new weapon, Athame Artis. At first glance, its description seems to be just an innocent story about a witch saving a kingdom, but we know how much the Hexenzirkel witches love to hide the truth in fiction, especially one witch in particular, Andersdotter, who is, coincidentally, the mother of the new mini Durin. This connection alone gives us a huge clue about who wrote this story. But on top of that, the terminology and the protagonists described here match volumes of the other books written by the witches. To piece this together though, we need a little backstory. Before Andersdotter passed away, the other members of the Hexenzirkel, at Alice's request, began writing a collection of stories called The Little Witch and the Undying Flame. This was meant to be a parting gift as her final moments on Teyvat approached. Each volume was written by a different witch, with the seventh and final book being partially written by Andersdotter herself and completed by Alice. Why does this matter? Because the story found in the source description shares a protagonist with a collection of stories. Alice was the one who originally named and created the character's backstory. It also borrows terminology from the second volume, written by Barbeloth, and stylistically matches the final book. Connecting all the dots, it becomes fairly obvious who the true author of this weapon story really is. So now, the most important question remains. Who is the protagonist of this story and how did she save Teyvat? To find the hidden truth, we have to deconstruct the story line by line and put the puzzle pieces back together. Let's look at the opening text. By the time the little witch arrived at the Day King's palace, twilight had already taken hold. Had she come any later, the kingdom would have already been passed beyond the Day King's rule. Before the night curtain descended, the Day King received her in what remained of his fleeting hours. This opening immediately tells us where and when. In this context, Twilight likely refers to Dainsleif, who held the title of the Twilight Sword. The story takes place at the king's palace after the events involving the five sinners had already occurred and the fall of Khaenri'ah was already in motion. The text confirms these were the final hours, perhaps even the final minutes of the last Vinster King's reign. And right in that critical time frame, our witch arrives to speak with him. While the first part of the text clarifies the setting, the second part reveals our protagonist. Listen how the king addresses her. O witch who has traversed the vast cosmos, kindler of time's eternal flame, what brings you to this lonely planet? And her response? I did not come to my own accord. It was the planet's cry that found me through the void. Answering its call, I crossed the gate of stars forgotten by time. This is the smoking gun. In the Hexenzirkel's book collection, the little witch was merely searching for the undying flame, but here she is the kindler of it. She is explicitly described as someone who can traverse the cosmos. Remember the quest A Prophecy from the Past? Andersdotter compares Alice to the sun. She describes her as a bright celestial being with such a powerful gravitational pull that others had no choice but to willingly orbit her. We know the Khaenri'ahs were aware of the vast universe outside Teyvat, but it became a taboo topic once they realized the dangerous implications. This tells us that whoever sent that distress signal, the cry that Alice heard, must have been someone high up in the king's circle, or perhaps even the king himself. Now, this is where it gets tricky. The text uses the word planet interchangeably with nation, and void with abyss. Their conversation works on two levels. It describes Teyvat as a planet in the cosmos, but it also serves as an analogy for Khaenri'ah, an underground nation floating in nothingness, surrounded by the abyss. The witch mentions using a gate of stars to enter. She likely used something similar to the gate we found deep under Sumeru, the only one we've seen marked by a massive star symbol. Could this be the only way to access this nation from Teyvat? Perhaps Khaenri'ah is protected by a barrier that makes physical entry impossible, keeping them hidden from the gaze of the gods. But this raises a massive question. How did the summoned Sibling enter? Did they pass through one of those physical gates, or did they use a method similar to the sign of Aposha? The next part of the conversation is fascinating because it gives us a report on the state of the universe itself. It paints a picture of a decaying cosmos, near the edge of finality. This echoes the exact same rhetoric we heard from the Voyager in the description of the finale of the Deep Gallery's artifact set. Both texts describe a universe that is slowly going dark, and when the witch mentions a region long considered dark and inhospitable, we see that double meaning come into play again. Obviously, on a cosmic scale, she's referring to Teyvat, but if we swap the terms, using word as nation, it perfectly describes the underground nation of Khaenri'ah, a kingdom buried in darkness, surrounded by the abyss. This parallelism with Enkanomiya, another region sunk deep below the surface with similar characteristics, makes you question the entire structure of Teyvat. Is the firmament only protecting the civilizations on the surface? That is a massive topic that I'm going to explore in a dedicated video sooner than later, so make sure to subscribe now so you don't miss it. Going back to our story, we start to get a clearer picture of the witch's character and her true motives for coming here. It turns out she wasn't being entirely truthful with the king. She didn't just hear a cry from the planet randomly. She had already heard about the probability of this disaster and the abyssal corruption during a Hexenzirkel meeting. This was not the whole story. In truth, the little witch had caught wind of whispers from this dark expanse, whispers that had flown to her on the eve of the night carnival. Under ordinary circumstances, she would likely have dismissed such strange signals as just another error from the scryglass. Now, you might be asking, what exactly is a night carnival and how connects to the witches? To answer that, we don't need to look any further than the second volume of The Little Witch and the Undying Fire. In that book, Barbeloth, the author of that specific volume, gives us the answer. The short answer: a night carnival is an ancient taboo ceremony, essentially a gathering of witches. Now, we could spend hours digging into real-world cultural folklore about night carnivals. It's a rabbit hole on its own. But we don't need to, because the book gives us the one detail that actually matters, but not in a way that you expect. It states, and I quote, that this event has a direct relation with a witch's romantic or marital status. Remember that specific detail about romance and marriage, because it's going to be extremely important for the next part of the text. And isn't it interesting? The source of this definition is Barbeloth, who is coincidentally the exact same source of the prophetic rumors Alice heard in the first place. If the first part of the text gave us the where and when, this next part gives us the motive. But as the message reached her, she was fretting over the next day's festivities, desperately trying to find a way to avoid her nemesis, who would also be there. So she seized the opportunity to hide away in her workshop, spending considerable effort deciphering this distant missive. The real reason she left for Khaenri'ah was because she was looking for an excuse to avoid the next gathering. And remember the whole marital status that we talked about earlier? While we don't know much about Alice's personal life, we do know that one specific witch got married, Ivanovna, also known by the codename Jay. And from past events, we also know that she left the Hexenzirkel once married. Alice knew that once the wedding took place, she would lose a sister, and we know how much she hates seeing her small circle get even smaller. To a long-lived individual like her, watching a friend choose love is a slow kind of grief. As the saying goes, what is love if not a death in the eyes of the undying? So in her twisted but brilliant mind, she probably thought that if she just wasn't there, maybe she could postpone the inevitable. And on top of that, Barbeloth would be there, likely screaming to the high heavens that she was correct again, as always. Taking all this into account, a distress signal from a doomed nation wasn't a tragedy for her, it was the perfect excuse. This carefree, slightly narcissistic avoidance fits Alice's personality to a T, and the timeline should match. By the time of Mini Durin's birth, during the Draco Rubedo event, Ivanovna was already gone from the circle. This implies her departure happened right around the Cataclysm. Speaking of which, what a bad period to get married, at the absolute brink of Teyvat's total annihilation. Must have been picturesquely wonderful. But I digress. The story takes us back to the present conversation between Alice and the delusional king, which ends abruptly when the latter disappears into the vast and all-engulfing abyss. The text describes his end with a line that is frankly disturbing. Melted away like cream. That specific phrasing, melted away like cream, leaves so much room for interpretation that it's almost impossible to pin down exactly what happened. Did he die? Did he transform? Did he become part of the abyss itself? Until we get more information, we have to assume the king is gone. Though in Teyvat, gone rarely means the end. The imagery painted here is horrifying. It seems that Khaenri'ah has reached the absolute tipping point of extinction. The darkness is rising. The king is dissolved, and the witch has to move fast if she wants to get out of this situation unscathed. What she sees during those moments coincidentally confirms the authenticity of our siblings' experiences, memories, and location as they fled towards the surface 500 years ago. Riding her broom beneath the blood-red moon, she traveled far before finally spying a lonely castle, glowing with firelight. The castle seemed to have been built by the Day King's army. For unknown reasons, it had escaped dissolution by the Sea of Mist. Does this sound familiar? This is the exact same imagery we saw in the We Will Be Reunited trailer, as Lumine ran through the destruction of Khaenri'ah. This confirms that their memory recollection from 500 years ago hasn't been tampered with. We can trust that their version of the truth is real. Now, I'm bringing up the Sibling seemingly out of nowhere because I believe they have a critical part to play here. I also believe that what we saw in that trailer happens after this story takes place, but you'll see why I say that by the end of the video. Going back to our protagonist, as she moves through the destruction, she spots a building glowing in the middle of this abyssal fog. For some reason, it isn't being engulfed. It stands like a lighthouse guiding sailors on high seas. Where have we seen glowing objects that repel or cleanse the abyss before? If you thought about the chasm, you are probably right. The Lumen Stone has those exact same properties. It's safe to assume that if the civilization living down in the chasm had this technology, the Khaenri'ahs likely had it too. The lonely castle the witch saw was likely a military camp of some sort surrounded by similar stones, creating a sanctuary in the dark. The figure she found waiting there is none other than Dainsleif. By this point, he has likely already been abandoned by the other sinners, who succumbed to the temptation. Surprisingly, he doesn't seem shocked to see her. Why? It's possibly he heard about Alice from Rhindaughter. Remember, Gol was a member of the Hexenzirkel too. Or perhaps he was involved in sending the distress signal himself. The specific details don't matter right now, and frankly, I doubt we're seeing any interaction between these two for a very long time, for reasons you'll see by the end of this story. What does matter is that he recognizes her. He knows she's a powerful witch, and he receives her not as an intruder, but as a last hope. And to be fair, at this point, he doesn't have too many options left. He's standing in the ashes of his kingdom, desperate to clean up the mess that he kind of ignited. Dainsleif tells Alice that trying to simply clean the corrupted zones on the surface is futile. It will all just come back, repeating the same cycle over and over. They need to cut the problem off at the source, and he knows exactly where to look. At his invitation, the little witch descended to the deepest level of the castle where, beyond its fragile boundaries, stretched a sea of pure darkness. This location sounds familiar. In fact, it sounds exactly like the place described in the Wings of Fate's Course Intertwined glider. The text confirms that the Vinster King himself led the sibling down to the kingdom's deepest depths. This must be the border separating Khaenri'ah from the abyss, the edge of the world, the final limit before the Sea of Nothingness begins. And just like the king took the sibling there to doom the world, Dainsleif is now taking Alice there to save it. It's a beautiful contrast, isn't it? Down in the depths, they found the gigantic machine that was absorbing abyssal energy into its core. This is the Perpetual Motion Machine, or you may call it the Holy Grail. By burning seawater, it generates light and heat. This machine is clearly a converter, the beating heart that powers all of Khaenri'ah. Without it, life down here would be near impossible. We know the underground nation was struggling with its energy resources. There were multiple projects competing through the years to bring a solution, but it seems this machine was the king's final bet, what he spent most of his time researching. In fact, from Act 4, an elegy for faded moonlight, we know that most of the Universitas Magistorium's human resources were specifically allocated to this abyssal energy research. Now, I want you to pay close attention to the description of the machine. It is a perpetual motion machine which absorbs abyssal energy into a core. And what is a human heart if not a perpetual motion machine? Yes, I'm going there. From the Wings of Fate's Course Intertwined, we know that, and I quote, the golden hair was used as a vessel by which unlimited abyssal power could be absorbed. Which makes me wonder, was the king using our sibling as the core of this machine? The location matches, the description matches. When the Khaenri'ahs summoned the Descender, they got something even better. They received the ultimate solution to their nation's energy problems. But as treacherous as fate and the greed of men are, in the end, this solution is what led to their demise. lies. The next part of the text continues the conversation between our two characters as they stand before this perpetual machine. And here, they make an observation that is both profound and confusing. Since all tangible things on this planet are merely shadows cast by light, so long as we can create a fire that never goes out. But doing this will only make the planet burn even faster, the little witch cited. The first sentence is a clear reference to Plato's allegory of the cave, and in this context it works on multiple levels. Here, planet once again has a double meaning. On one hand, it refers to the nation of Khaenri'ah. As an underground nation, they are literally living in a cave, but ironically, they are the ones reaching for forbidden knowledge, to understand the true nature of existence. Narratively, this is a brilliant twist. Those living in the dark underground are actually closer to the truth than those living on the surface under the light. On the other hand, it refers to Teyvat itself and the people living under the false sky. They are completely oblivious to the reality of their world, mesmerized by shadows cast by the gods and their false shepherds. Now, let's look closer at the first sentence. It seems to justify and even desire the continuity of this system of illusions. It suggests that as long as the machine is maintained, the truth hidden by the shadows doesn't matter. The second sentence is a direct objection to this. Initially, I thought this whole segment was a monologue by Alice, but on a second analysis, it becomes clearer that the first line is spoken by Dainsleif. He is knowledgeable enough to know the truth beyond this world, yet here he seems to be choosing the theatrics of the shadows, maintaining the status quo to keep his nation alive, no matter the cost. In this sense, he's no different from the prisoners inside Plato's cave who live in ignorance. I would argue he's even worse. He knows it's a lie, but he embraces it out of desperation. In this scenario, Alice is the only one who sees things clearly. She's the only one choosing the hard truth over comfortable lies. I wonder if this is going to be her archetype in the story going forward, the one who refuses to let the shadows keep dancing. Either way, she correctly proclaims that this nation is doomed the moment its abyssal power source runs dry. And then, out of nowhere, to the absolute shock of Dainsleif, she takes matters into her own hands. Without a second of hesitation, she does something reckless. Before the warrior could react, the little witch drew the sword from his back and hurled it into the perpetual motion machine. Now, there are two possibilities here. We can take it literally, she simply shoved the sword into a mechanical engine. But ask yourself, why would you need a sword to sever the connection between the abyss and a machine? Why use a blade? This leads us to the second possibility, a much darker one, with massive implications. If the sibling was the core, she stabbed the sibling. By striking the vessel, she killed the host to stop the absorption of power, successfully severing the connection between the machine and the abyss. And this changes everything. This could potentially explain the biggest mystery in the game. Why is our sibling recorded in Irminsul? If the original sibling died here during the Cataclysm, absorbed into Teyvat's ley lines, then the person we are chasing throughout the story might not be the original at all. They might be a Samsara copy, a snapshot, or a reanimated vessel, functioning but fundamentally of this world. The traveler mentions multiple times that they feel something is strange or off about the sibling whenever they meet. That something might be exactly this. They are looking at a ghost. Maybe this is one of the many secrets that Dainsleif keeps close to his chest. Only time will tell. The whole sequence of events must have been confusing, even for him. As he reached out for his sword, he vanished, and simultaneously, the last bit of artificial light was extinguished. In that instant, the nation was plunged into absolute darkness. The Khaenri'ah that existed just moments ago was gone. When he woke up, likely saved by the witch's magic, the cataclysmic events of the previous day seemed like a distant memory. The fire was out, the machine was silent, and he was alive, ready to set on his journey once more. As Alice departed, she was surprisingly satisfied with her solution to this world-ending problem. She knew it was only a temporary fix, because human arrogation knows no limit, and it's only a matter of time before someone, somewhere, tries to reach for the forbidden again. But before leaving for good, she left an instructive message for the night, one that foreshadows his entire future. This cycle may go for a long, long time, until the day you two become nothing but an empty shell. But no matter what, you must keep going. At least, you must live until we meet again. She knew the consequences that would haunt the Khaenri'ahs for eternity. She knew about the curse of immortality that turns men into monsters and empty shells. Yet, she still left him with a command: survive. This leaves us with one final burning question. Why? What does Alice need Ainsleif for? What is the one thing only he can do in the future she foresees? So, when we put all these pieces together, what are we really looking at? It is the final moments of a foolish king who tried to save his nation by turning our sibling into a living battery. It is the story of how Alice walked into the end of the world just to avoid a slightly unpleasant social situation. And in those final moments, she made the hard choice. She didn't save the kingdom, she saved the planet, likely by severing the sibling's life to stop the machine. She left Ainsleif in the ashes with a single cruel command: live. This is a story of how Alice saved Teyvat, but thematically it is a story of contrast. On one hand, we witness the dehumanization of the sibling, a human, heir to an entire kingdom, reduced to a literal battery, an object used to fuel the machinery of human greed. On the other hand, we see the humanization of Alice. It is a rare opportunity to see this untouchable, chaotic, almost omnipresent being in a vulnerable position. She is running away because she's afraid to say goodbye. She is acting not out of divine sense of duty, but out of the very human fear of loss. And in the middle of all stands Ainsleif, a prisoner to the theatrics of the shadows. When Alice destroyed the illusions by destroying the machine, she tore down the cave walls and forced Ainsleif to step into the painful light of reality. There's an imperative virtue in that final verb: live. It wasn't just advice, it was a command that forced him to bear witness to the truth, ensuring that someone would be left to remember the cost of that day. If you enjoyed this deep dive, I'm working on other similar videos, so make sure you are subscribed so you don't miss it. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.